Welcome to this webinar as part of the ISRICM project. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this hour of diving into the topic of social inclusion in the context of, the quality of life for Europeans, but particularly in the service, of course, also for the integration of Ukrainians living in Europe. Today we'll be visited, if you will, not by the ghosts of Christmas present or a future for that matter, but by two really cool experts, and of course also Nina Sunderberg from the Nordic Wellbeing Academy. Joining us today is Christina Carnovale from the Kugui Hub, that you'll meet in a second. You can probably find her on screen somewhere at the bar on top. And also Dr. Yvonne Pinselner, a researcher from Austria, to take us through two different areas of how social inclusion plays in sort of sometimes maybe slightly hidden, but absolutely determinant role in the well-being for workplaces and organizations, and indeed then also, of course, for people. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure then to give the floor to Christina Carnovale. And of course, the very brief intro didn't do you any merit. So please, Christina, if you can sort of give us and the audience an insight into what kind of your work does really relate to social inclusion. And of course, I know that you're going to be sharing a small idea about something that's about a European best practice, I believe, as well. Right.
Great. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I think that is also important to facing different kind of activity that we are doing. As you were saying, actually, we are working a lot in terms of social inclusion. We are an NGO. We are based in Ibiza. And with the work that we are doing every day is how to kind of more closely people regarding mental health, well-being, and as well as social inclusion. We are working with young people, we are working with adults, and we are working with children. So that means that for us is kind that we are touching different kind of target group, and we are touching as well different kind of needs of people. So what we analyze that the social inclusion is something that is really important in every stage of our lives. So we can say that from the part of the workplaces, for example, that is the one of the more topic that we are working on. And I will also delighted to share with you later the best practices that we received from our national agency here in Spain. And is actually regarding one project that it has been recognized as best practices in terms of social inclusion for workplaces, for remote workplaces and hybrid workplaces. So we worked a lot in terms of this kind of inclusion that are behind the digital landscapes. So I think that first of all, in our kind of work, social inclusion is not kind of separated topic, but is something that is every day touching our lives, and is not regarding access, because we are all linked and all connected every day. But sometimes the connection is kind of dealing with us, because we should talk about participation. So social inclusion is participation, the participation that we can touch behind the lives of the people, and this is in every stage. So I would like, first of all, to point out regarding the key needs that we can identify in our lives every day. So first of all, I would like to say emotional and relational skills. So in terms of workplaces, and also for children, and also for sports, because for example, I am also working in another project with volleyball teams. And there, the social inclusion and the participation, since we are talking about youngsters, so it's kind of, or even different and even more difficult, the part of the participation and social inclusion is something that I am winning today the match, for example, so I am the leader, but you are losing, so I am better than you. So this is kind of also things that we should consider and that we should working on in terms of participation and social inclusion. So that's why I would also to point out this part. Then regarding the growing gaps that we are analyzing in inclusive digital communication, because as I was saying before, we are connected, but we are not necessarily included in this project. Regarding workplaces in hybrid and remote workplaces, we realized that people that are working behind a screen are not really connected, that people are just sharing the office. And this is kind of normal, how to say, but this is not growing in terms of participation or in terms of building groups, that this is something that at university they are teaching us to working in group, to sharing with your colleagues and so on. But then we are realizing that the workplaces in terms like remote and hybrid workplaces now are growing even more, and it's kind normal, is like also related to the freedom that we have in our work. So it's normal and it's grateful to see that, but this not means that digital communication will just not including each other behind the digital communication. And lastly, I would like also to point out the part of the organization, so the role of the organization and how the organization are working in order to making practical tools in the inclusion every day. Because, for example, this is for like bigger organization, that we are also working in terms of giving like kind of workshops in terms of how to integrate the well-being of workers during everyday life. So I think that there are many organizations that are lacking really the practical tools how to make this in the organization and for every day. So I think that is something that we firstly we need to work on an individual background, and then we can just working on an organizational background, and in the end on a community background. So I think that this part means settling with this organization is something that needs to be pointed out. And then I will be just briefly explaining you the project, and I will also share with you later, maybe if you want to know more about this project, and I will share with you later the link. So we worked together between, it was another project founded by the European Union from the national agency from the Spanish national agency, working together Spain, Cyprus, and Latvia. And we created like a emotional intelligence tool how to connecting people working in hybrid and remote workplaces. So we worked a lot also here in the island. As I said before, we are based in Ibiza, so we worked a lot here in the island and with people that are living the island all the entire year. That is something strange, because a lot of people are just staying here for the summer and then going everywhere, but not staying in the island. So I think that is also that has been pointed out from the national agency, the work that we had at local level with people that are working this way. And as well, here in the island, we have the highest like a lot of people that are working in remote and hybrid workplaces for maybe companies that are in everywhere in the world, maybe in Australia, but they are living here in the island. So also for that, it was kind of our needs.
Wonderful. Um, There's a couple of elements that I'm fairly sure that, and thank you, Christina, for kicking us off. But I'm fairly sure that there's a couple of words and key themes that our next speaker will also be touching upon, especially when it comes to some of the elements of our digital communities and the digital communication. So, moving on, then we'll be returning to Christina later. And of course, Christina might be sharing a couple of things in the chat as well. But moving on for a second, then to Dr. Yvonne Princelner. And maybe though, Yvonne, please, in your research, how does sort of social inclusion, how does that play a factor? And in that, um, and maybe, of course, how can we also connect it to some of the things that Christina also touched upon?
hmm Um, well, when it comes, just for you to know, I'm a communication scientist by background. So I specialize on media representation, especially of marginalized groups and how they behave online and, how they interact with each other and how social inclusion can actually take place. And in the end, when we talk about social inclusion online on digital platforms, then it's very often so negotiated and distorted through this negotiation. And this is due to different reasons, because digital platforms, they can at the same time enhance inclusion and exclusion, right? So it's not always just about inclusion when we talk about digital communication. And this has a lot to do with how those platforms are made. For example, algorithms, right? Algorithms, they reinforce dominant voices. So very often so when we are on digital platforms, we have a visibility bias, We get shown pictures that are most clicked, but not the ones that are really relevant for us. We do see a lot of marginalized groups online, right? That's the nice thing about especially social media. It's a bottom-up movement. Everyone can have their say and everyone can have a voice. But in the end, marginalized groups in particular, they're also the ones that are more often so than not confronted with harassment, right? Hate speech, for example, or even silenced, which is then exclusion instead of social inclusion. So inclusion does not mean simply having access, like Christina mentioned before. It's not just about access, it's about participation, but I would even add about safe participation, right? You have to feel safe in order to really live social inclusion online and on digital platforms. And then also, we face something called social comparison online, right? Social comparison when we compare each other with other people. This can be especially tricky when it comes to upward social comparison, idealized identities that we meet online in terms of beauty, right? Just think of the beauty filters, people that we meet. Like right now, the Gen Z seriously has a discussion going on about influencers not being as attractive in real life as they appear to be on platforms. This is something that is a big topic that is being talked about right now. But also when it comes to wellness, mental health, it's all about productivity. It's about self-optimization, which very often so can exclude certain types of people. So exclusion really becomes something that is psychological, right? But also structural through the means of the platforms that we're dealing with online. And then we also have something called parasocial relationships when we are on digital platforms. So when we want to be socially included, also in the workplace, maybe, like you've never met your coworker in an office, like Christina said before. You might think you are part of the community, even more so, when you feel you belong to an influencer, to their community, right? You feel excluded, included, but in the end, it's a very one-sided kind of relationship that you're facing here. So it's more of a simulated belonging that you have if you only participate safely online instead of also having, like Christina mentioned, play and conversations in real life. So this is digital platforms in a nutshell. We can't hear you. Yeah.
My microphone refused to include me. But an inclusion that is really actually an exclusion. And of course, how not just in a digital space, but also in physical spaces, how easy it is to maybe mistake one for the other. So before we dive even deeper into the connections between what Christina just touched upon before and Dr. Yvonne Pitzelner right now, we move on to our third speaker today, Nina Sunderberg, co-founder of the Nordic Wellbeing Academy, and also, of course, one of the experts in the ISRICM project. So, Nina, social inclusion is part of the work in the ISRICM project, focusing on workplaces.
Yeah.
What's the element that really sort of drives that in terms of how you balance as an organization, but also possibly as an individual trying to actually get this to work in those kinds of organizations that we call workplaces? What is the role?
What is the role? Yeah, that's the big question. Some of the key elements that both Yvonne and Christina have mentioned are some of the things that we've also been working with in the guidelines for how to integrate Ukrainian refugees in the workplaces even more. So some of the things that we've been investigated and researched in the different workshops that we had during this project also put a focus on the emotional regulation as some sort of part of feeling safe in a workplace, but also to feel that you have a saying in the workplace, that you have a meaning in the workplace. So imagine coming from a very turbulent process of traveling to another country, trying to fit into new norms, new values, new culture, and also besides that, also struggling with language, but also struggling with what are the subtle in between the lines rules that I need to apply in order to fit in on this workplace. So all of these things makes a newcomer to an organization feel very unsafe. So how do we create workplaces, but also communities where people can feel safe? We need to understand that we are all coming from the same place. We all need to feel that we have a saying in what's going on in the places that we are, but also that our emotions are valid and they are okay to feel. So what we've been working with more concrete is how to look at hiring practices. How do we hire people without being biased? How do we create a language around that? How do we create practices in the hiring process where it's okay to actually pause sometimes, where it's okay to say, well, this makes me uncomfortable, or this makes me, I don't really know how to answer this, but being aware that some of these things, being in a new situation in a new country, can create so much anxiety and uncertainty that we as organizations need to have practices that actually feels like a safety net and not something that is even more challenging for the people who are trying to create a new life in a new country. So some of the things we've been working with is, as I mentioned before, the hiring practices to be more bias-free. For example, having CVs where you, for example, don't have any names on it. So you don't have any, so the ones who are hiring don't have any biases that starts or prejudice that starts when one's reading the CVs. One other thing that we also worked with a lot was how do we create organizations where the mentors or the ones who are responsible for taking care of the newcomers in the organizations are trained in being more emotional aware, and also are able to regulate themselves, or being aware what triggers them in the situations on the workplaces. So we've been working a lot with focusing on people that might have one mentor that is the more practical mentor in the workplace, but then also maybe have a mentor that's the most social mentor in the workplace. So it's not only, so the newcomer are not only have to rely on one person, but maybe two people instead. And how do we also focused on creating habits where some of the culture that the newcomers are coming with could play a part of the culture in the workplaces. That could be dinners where everybody brought their special dish that they really loved, or it could be some sort of holiday that is celebrated in the newcomers' home country, but is not a part of necessarily the country that they came to. But to create rooms where we are also human beings with the culture that we are coming with and the emotions that we are coming with. So that's very, it's very difficult to talk about all these guidelines that we have, but I'm really happy to hear that both Yvonne and Christina are talking about the same things about how do we feel safe to participate? What are the foundation for that? And how do we create awareness around that in the communities and in the organizations that we are dealing with? Because all of us need to feel safe to participate. That's I would say that's a human right, right?
Right.
Right.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Thank you, Nina. Now connecting these, of course, we went from Christina and workplaces and the digital component in those workplaces, past Yvonne, and of course, many of those digital elements, and then back again into those workplaces. But Christina, if we can sort of borrow from your brain and experience to begin with, people, of course, are connected often with as Yvonne pointed to, with both correct but also false idols that they see online. But in so many ways, they're of course also connected via their workplace and the physical presence that they sometimes crave. What are some of the key elements then that you've found so far from that best practice that bridges that sort of gap between the fact that we cannot always be physically close as we are, well, not today, yet we're still sort of bound by a joint experience that still gives us a sense, of course, of community. But in a workplace, how have you found some of the elements that sort of perhaps or perhaps not mirrors some of the key elements that Nina also mentioned?
Yes, I think that this part is really, really important because it's something that we point out in our research regarding this project in concrete, because actually it was like really point out this kind of issues that we can have in terms not to be present like face to face. And this is not excluded but because there are kind of formal barriers, but it's because the communication styles and as well as the emotional dynamics that can be different when we are like behind in a digital communication. So for example, what we have been working on with our people, I want to say our people, because it's something also that we had like different cycles and working even with the same people. If for us, it was also kind of relationships, how to say. So that's why, for example, we analyzed, and this is also included in the part of the training program, all the part of related emotional awareness and as well as stress management that is like behind the time management, because there are many people that since they are working, not like how to say full day, but it's kind of organizing your time differently, because when you are going to the office, you know that you are starting at 8 and you are going out from the office at 4 o'clock, for example. You are doing your 8 hours, and it's just the time that you're spending in the office. But what we realized in the digital workplaces and hybrid and remote workplaces, that people are organizing themselves, but they are practically challenging with the time management. This became in a stress management. And this is like the kind of the key that is pointing out also the inclusive communication. And we analyzed as well digital well-being tools. So we had kind of gaming, how to say, that people were receiving like different kind of email at same time, different kind of message. You are just becoming stressful of everything that you are receiving, and you are not concentrated, and this of course is affecting your well-being in terms of like even personal life, not counting the professional life, but for the personal life, of course this is affecting you. So what we worked with them and is also to like giving priorities. If you are doing one task that is like, for example, in the email that you received at 2 o'clock, just finalize this and then go through the email that you received at 2:30. Not going to the emails that you were receiving after and kind of forgot or putting just online the other tasks that you are doing. So I think that this is also important to analyze in terms of digital and digital communication as well. And then another point that I think and I consider that is really important to point out at this stage is the part of communication behind an email and communication behind the screen. This is not the same. See in the eyes and say to someone, this is good, this is maybe well not done, because we are making mistake. We are all making mistake, and I think that we have kind of forgot the culture of error, that we can commit mistake. We are all doing mistake, but it's kind of that are not accepted as we want to see the acceptance of the error. And of course, behind the digital communication, there can be kind of misunderstanding that we cannot control. So based on that, this can just start in kind of burnout for some people that are not going to giving their maximum on their professional and personal lives. So I think that we should also include this part. It's really important in terms of learners for digital communications, and pointing out the culture of error as really important things on everyday lives. And I think that it's really important in order also as well to create structured spaces for as well informal exchange and everything that can be behind our life, not only talking about professional parts, but also as personal parts.
A powerful element as well. Now, as most of you probably remember, we are living through 2026, and those of you that thought that 2025 was peculiar, you had another thing coming. And of course, thinking of the element of social inclusion, it is really difficult not also to take the fact into account that we have not just a European conversation about social inclusion, nor just maybe a Southern Europe or a Northern Europe conversation about. We have a global conversation about the role of social inclusion in the first place, the role of empathy in international policy, the role of course, of to some extent humanity as well. How does that reflect also some of the conversations that you see taking place from both in terms of values, but also in terms of the major storytelling that you see, maybe Yvonne, from previous conversations? Are we moving towards maybe a situation where it's bad in real life, but it's really wonderful in digital communication, or something else?
Well, you know that I'm a firm believer that digital communication is not all bad, but of course it has its pitfalls, especially when it comes to, let's put it that way, fostering extremism in all ways, forms, shapes, sizes, right? Um, and those of you who know me know that I preach a lot about visibility, right? Especially when it comes to media, especially when it comes to digital communication, right? But in terms of social inclusion, visibility can just be, well, a first step towards creating awareness, but it's not, or it does not equal social inclusion, right? We see more diversity than ever on the media, on all of the platforms, if you so will. But a lot of it is pure tokenism, just random keywords thrown around, right? There's no real redistribution of representation and also of power, which we would actually need in order to foster social inclusion. And also, what we have to really keep in mind that the media ecosystems that we're dealing with these days, they reward extremes, right? Just thinking about rage bait, for example. The more outrage you create, the more clicks, the more views you get, and the more you will be out there and your message will be out there. So, very often so, and I think this is a real big danger, inclusion becomes politicized. I see that a lot when I teach intercultural communication, for example, right? There's always the us versus them narrative that starts happening, especially also in online communication. And what happens then is that as soon as we brand an outgroup as the outgroup, the empathy for that outgroup decreases, so they get excluded, while at the same time, the defensiveness of the outgroup, of course, increases. And that is not really an enabler for safe participation, for social inclusion to even happen. And another issue that I see, especially looking at the platform logic, is that we have outrage that will always overweigh nuance when you look at different posts, the content of the posts, right? Especially in political terms, for example, and simplicity that always outweighs complexity. And a very, very good example for that is the success of fake news, for example, right? Fake news are being spread because very complex topics are being boiled down to a very simple narrative. It works really well. It's easy to consume. And you know, as long as we can blame someone else, having them as a scapegoat, well, you know, we're fine. So inclusive discourses really become way harder to sustain, you know, with the platform logics that we're dealing with at the moment. And there's also, due to that fact, of course, a shift towards micro communities. The people who want to safely participate, they then will not engage with the mainstream anymore, but they will find themselves in very niche communities. And they will find themselves in identity safe spaces, which means that, in my opinion, inclusion at the moment and also social inclusion is becoming way more localized than something we talk about on a societal level, very much so due to the platform logics that we're dealing with, right?
Fascinating element where often in other terms in public health, you have the phrase of, for instance, what gets measured gets done, and it's impossible to measure anything that you cannot identify. In this case, of course, the irony, or the sad irony maybe, is as soon as you identify something, and this might be a quantum mechanic kind of thing, you lose the ability to some extent to also protect it. How fascinating and deeply ironic. In that context, then also, Nina, those European perceptions about social inclusion, is that one where you so far see that sort of simply following the online sort of conversation, or well the American, maybe the orange American kind, that is, example, or is there a difference in the European perception so far?
Difficult question, but I think one thing that Yvonne said was really a key element for me also, is that we created we created the digital, or we didn't create it, but we bought into the digital platforms that sort of does this to us as communities. But there's always something good about something, and something maybe less good. I really, really like that people have the possibility of finding their tribe today, feeling secure and safe in a space where they can identify with other people, where they can learn about how other people deal with the things that they are dealing with themselves. But there's also the problem with it, that it becomes maybe small communities that are not heard within the broader communities. One thing that I have personally is very happy about is that there's been so much focus on, for example, women's health, and the lack of women, for example, in research and in clinical trials. That for example, in the Nordics, we've started new movements that are actually really moving things right now. As of yesterday, 300,000 Danish women were asked to participate, to talk about their health, because of the understanding that they haven't been a part of the clinical trials, and we want to be wiser, and we need to know more about women's health. So they are inviting so many people, so many women into this to this new understanding of what is women's health, what is it based on, what are the things that we need to know, just in order to make women's health safer and smarter for women in the future. But one other thing that came into mind when hearing both Christina and Yvonne is we just had an election in Denmark, and for once we had a lot of very young women, a big majority of young women coming into being elected and coming into politics. And one thing that really pissed me off, I can say that, was that there was a debate about they have only been elected because they are beautiful and they are young and they are women. And some of these young women actually participated in national TV and were trying to talk about why do we talk about this in 2026, and of course, there was someone else in there saying that we know that beauty is something that makes us biased, la di da di da. But this is crazy that we have a discussion about appearance and not influence or not participation, when we know that inclusion, participation, and all that we've been talking about for the last 35 minutes is something that is a human right. So just imagine starting your political career and have to apologize for your gender or for your age or for your appearance. How does that color your way into your political work? I think it just made me really, really sad. So in one hand, I see that people have their safe communities, but when we talk about the overall discussion on including people, I don't think we moved very much. I don't think that we actually progressed very much. I think and this is just a hunch, I think there is sort of a revolution coming We see that the old structure is not working anymore, especially when we see what's been going on with the orange politics. But it's still in the making. But it's coming from bottom up, and I think that's the only way to change things, is that coming from the bottom up is the way to go ahead. And you asked me a question and I forgot it, Lars. Can you ask me again?
Well, I think that you kind of actually answered the question, of course, about whether Europe has whether we are seeing the same evolution in Europe or as in the US.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
we do, and I just want one more example is also the focus also on neurodivergency is also an example of a debate where we also talk about how to include people better and how to understand that this is also a part of people. This is not necessarily a superpower, as it sometimes is called, but it gives both good things for the individual and for the organization, for the workplace, and it also has some vulnerabilities. So when we can look at the balance like that, and it's like that being a human being, right? We all need to have periods of our life where we say, I'm going through something difficult. I might not perform as well as I did before, or I might not read my emails after 5, or some of the things that Christina also mentioned, that we need to be able to understand that every human being has balance, needs balance in their life, and organizations need that too. So we need to make organizations and workplaces understand how humans thrive the best. And we haven't really been good at that. We've been very much looking at how to be more effective, how to have the best outcome, etc., etc. But now the paradigm shift is that we understand when people thrive, they actually perform better. So once we understand that in the organizations and in communities and in politics, we can actually start making things better for people. But I have blue eyes, so I think that this will happen in the next 10 years. I hope so.
well, this is, of course, not a Marvel superhero movie. And clearly, then, as you point out, Nina, neurodivergency is not a superpower, nor is it particularly a superpower to be a Ukrainian or a woman or any sort of group that, for all kinds of reasons, are not necessarily included in whatever community that they should have been included in. But speaking of superpowers, and maybe as a question as well for, let's maybe go to Yvonne, because you alluded to it already, Nina. Um, what about empathy? Would you see that as a superpower that really sort of thinking of that element about being able to make people thrive, that is something that we truly sort of can actually focus on, can recruit for, can nudge, can nurture, Yvonne? Is that something that you could sort of see that this actually has the growth potential for the 21st century?
I always find it so interesting, especially when I'm teaching intercultural communication. Um, Everybody's always so scared about AI taking away all of our jobs, right? AI sort of overpowering humans. Yeah, if that is the case, then we humans should ask ourselves, what is our actual superpower, right? What is it? Soft skills, social skills, intercultural competence, digital literacy, discourse, communication, right? Understanding nuances, right? Human beings are still way better at understanding nuances than any AI out there. Still, I'm saying still, I don't know where this whole story is going to go in the end, but we have to foster that. We have to train that, right? To me, when social inclusion fails, in the end, it's a failure of communication. You know, it is a failure of communication. When I look at digital communication, right now what we're doing is we're not training empathy. We're not training soft skills. We're training the exact opposite. Like I just mentioned before, we're reducing empathy. We're raising defense. We're creating very local, tiny communities instead of opening up the discourse. And I think this is something you can really train. And yeah, Nina, I want to be as positive as you are, that this bottom up movement is going to happen. But I think in order for it to happen, there also needs to be a top down change, right? The change can't always come from bottom up. Leadership also has to be trained in nuance, in leadership skills, in listening, and not just looking at HR documents, compliance, putting formal roles on someone. Okay, you're wearing the head of the gender and diversity responsible officer right here. You do the job. It needs to be part of the everyday natural workflow, letting people participate in it. That's, to me, that is fostering empathy. And that is what we are actually good at. If we don't let the systems that are not training us otherwise overpower us, in my opinion.
And of course, without really knowing that you agree, Christina, but kind of assuming that you would not completely disagree, would you then, from your work, point to some of the places that would actually then facilitate that same shift? How do you train? How do you train empathy, or how do you sort of maybe recruit for empathy? Is that something that you've seen as well as some cases or some practices that you would point to from your experience?
I think yes, but not everywhere. I think that is something that depends on the people that you are approaching with. Not all people are able to make like empathic tools or empathic learners, how to say, in different kind of even if we are talking about in terms of organization, sometimes people are more focused on being leaders, but sometimes we have also the not the properly title to be leaders. Be leaders for me also means be empathic and to make in the position of the others. But sometimes people are not making this kind of seeing these things in terms of to be leaders. So I think that this is not something that can be there are not exercise to do to be empathic, but I think that what we should point out is to making them thinking. So what we are doing in these things is to talking with them and making in the position of the others. So basically, in these kinds of things, this happens to us properly working with maternity leaves. So when people are coming back from maternity leave, is something that in the organization is of course accepted and well seen, but in terms of methodological work, something it has been changed during the last months. So people that are coming back from maternity leave are having like kind of attitude kind of difference because they want to stay on the work. Each person is also making different attitude when they are coming back, but from on top level is to stay in the position of the other, to make yourself in the position of the other and thinking as if you are this person and the way that you're acting. So I think that these are like small exercise and that you can use in order to be in the practical way, just stay in the position of the other and how you were acting if you were like this person that is just making this problem or is analyzing this situation in her life. So I think that's, and this is something that I also said before when we started, is something, this kind of participation in terms of social inclusion is something that needs to be started individually. in order then to go to the organizational level and in the end affecting the community level?
Well, given your energy, Christina, we both know that, of course, there is actually a decent chance that at one point you will have the position of Ursula von der Leyen. But that is, of course, not where you are right now. But if we are playing for a second or two, what would it be some of the policies that you would, I mean, based on the experience that you have now, that you would really hope for at the European level, if not a global, that people would advance tomorrow? And of course, you can say that they should go to the EQ Cultivate website and learn everything, but that's kind of cheating. So, if you were to point to some other elements that you would really hope that Europe or even Spain would begin tomorrow, what would that be?
I think that there will be at least 1 or 2 days during the month, the working months, that the team is working together. So, like for example, that are not respecting kind of roles, that it's really important to having roles. It's really important to have kind of a different level, even if we are talking about a big team, for example. But I think that the collaboration and to stay at same level for one day, it will increase the collaboration between people, and it will also gain in terms of relationships, because always you will have that people are not in same level, or for example people that just something like skins or faces that are not good between each others or something like that, but it's just to my solution. It can be that one day in each month, because this is not something that should be done one per year, but for months, just that all the team is kind of forgetting the deadlines, forgetting everything that you need to develop for tomorrow morning, and stay all together and thinking in a position that your position individual is kind of highlighted and is kind of pointing out and how to build stuff this way, and forgetting roles. So forgetting that you are on top, and there are people that are in another level that is not yours. I think that maybe this can help in order to make empathy as well.
Monthly Social Inclusion Day. So, Yvonne, or should I say Dr. von der Leyen, for a day or at least a second or two, if you were sort of then given the same sort of question, policy or two that you would be hoping for that we would begin tomorrow.
Might sound really weird right now. I already think that Europe is pretty big on policies and pretty good in policies and legal frameworks, like just looking at the GDPR and everything, right? But I think, very honestly, social inclusion is not about policies. It's about implementing it into our daily work life. Like I said before, making it part of our daily workflow. And there's one thing I want to point out, because I think that is really important. If I were van der Prinzellna and not van der Leyen, right, for a day at the European Union, I would say we have to foster a mind shift in terms of social inclusion. We talk about social inclusion as if it was such an abstract thing. And I think this is where we get lost. Ask anyone randomly out there, what does inclusion even mean? I mean, I'm teaching this to my students. They have a gist of it. They don't really know what it means. Let's make or create a mind shift. Social inclusion as a skill and not as an abstract term. Social inclusion should become a skill, because then we can think ahead and say, okay, a skill we can train, right? We can train intercultural competencies. We're still lacking that. We're in Europe. There's so many countries with so many different cultures. We can also train conflict navigation. Lots of different cultures together creates conflict. Doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but this needs to be trained. We can train digital literacy in order to understand when fake news is out there, when people are being scapegoated for something that they did not do. So why not create this mind shift mentality of social inclusion being a skill that we can train, a muscle that we can train, right? That's what I would very much so
Stronger
demand.
focus on training and skills. And of course, kind of indirectly, I suppose, mirroring the old joke, if you think that education is expensive, try ignorance. Nina, then, I don't know that you would ever consider necessarily becoming von der Leyen either, but von der Sunderberg for a second.
Yeah.
If you were sort of, and of course, it doesn't have to be a policy, it could be a practice as well. What would you dream of? Maybe also a monthly sort of social inclusion day, or maybe more training, or a third door?
I would say being a psychotherapist, an emotion-focused psychotherapist as I am, I would say that some of the things we've been talking about is also training empathy. And how do you do that? That could be training your mentalization skills. So how do we have one foot in the other person's shoe and still have one foot in our own shoe? How do we understand their view of the world? How the narrative that they have around culture, emotions, themselves and other people? So how do we sort of combine our own understanding of the world and trying to understand other people's understanding of the world? That's mentalization. And I agree with Iman, it's a skill you can train. It's a mindset that you can train. It's a muscle you can educate yourself in, or not educate yourself in, you need really good trainers in it. But I would say that would be one thing that could be, that I would choose as van der Leyen. Training people how to mentalize even better. That would be one thing that can actually change a whole community and organization.
Thank you. It's 4 o'clock, so it's time to say indeed thank you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights, and on bringing us just a little bit closer to a more inclusive society. As at least I know that one of our participants today would really hope for us to achieve at one point. So thank you across Europe, from the wonderful sunny Ibiza to the probably less sunny Austria, at least less than Ibiza, and of course actually quite sunny Scandinavia as well.